Good evening. My name is Melissa Musliner, and I am a member of the League of Women Voters, Wayzata Plymouth area, and I will be your moderator tonight for the House District 44A, 44B candidate forum. I would like to welcome our candidates and our viewers on behalf of our host, the League of Women Voters, Wayzata Plymouth area. The League of Women Voters, a volunteer, nonpartisan political organization, encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. The League does not support or oppose any political party or candidate. The views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates, not those of the League of Women Voters. It is our purpose in sponsoring forums such as this to provide you with an opportunity to hear candidates discuss issues that are important to you. This evening's forum is provided to give you the opportunity to learn about the candidates running for House Districts 44A and 44B. There is never enough time to cover all the issues in a setting such as this. If your questions were not addressed this evening, please feel free to contact the candidates directly. The rules for this evening's forum are as follows. Each candidate will be allowed a 2-minute opening statement. A 15-second warning signal will be given before the total time has elapsed. A question and answer period will be held following the opening statements. The answers will be confined to 1 minute unless designated by the moderator. Questions will be answered by the candidates in a rotating order. A 15-second warning will be given to the candidates. Following the question and answer period, the candidates will each have 2 minutes for a closing statement. Candidates, please finish your sentence quickly when you see the stop sign, or you will be interrupted. No reference of a personal nature will be tolerated. A person's public record may be examined, but not their character. This forum is made available to encourage the voting public to focus on the issues. Members of the public have been encouraged to submit questions online in advance. Questions that are unclear, hostile, or of a personal nature will not be used. Those that fall in the same general area may be consolidated. Recordings of this forum may not be used without the express written approval of the League. The League will only allow audio, video of this event to be broadcast in its entirety, except by the media reporting on the event. The candidates for House District 44A and House District 44B are Cheney Clevorn, candidate for House District 44A. Perry Newis, candidate for House District 44A. Patty Acomb, candidate for House District 44B. And Gary Porter, candidate for House District 44B. We will begin with Cheney Clevorn, candidate for House District 44A, to give her introductory remarks.
Thank you. I am State Representative Cheney Clevorn, and I would like to extend my appreciation to the League of Women Voters of Wayzata and Plymouth for hosting this forum tonight. I would also like to thank the City of Plymouth and CCX Media for your partnership with the League to encourage voting in our community. It is an honor and a privilege to represent our wonderful community at the Capitol in St. Paul. During these 2 years, I have had many important conversations, some of them sensitive in nature, with our families, and we have found ways to find solutions wherever possible. I've worked with our mayor, our city council, administration, and our police chief to understand the needs and concerns pertaining to legislation and public safety. I've had regular communications and meetings with our school districts, Osseo, Robbinsdale, and Wayzata, to represent our students and our teachers and pass legislation, which is good for our community and quality education. Our business community has been fantastic in their cooperation as we work to meet their needs prior to and during COVID. I especially like to give a shout out to our City Economic Development Director, Danette Parr. She has been a wonderful partner in this work. This is what good representation looks like. relationships, partnership, trust, and collaboration. While we have not achieved every outcome we wanted, I did my best, and I worked with respect for others and in the spirit of cooperation. In the year to come, challenging decisions will need to be made, and opportunities for growth will emerge. In both instances, it will require listening, collaboration, and leadership. I use my skills as a mediator and businesswoman to work for our community. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Perry Newis, candidate for House District 44A.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation to be here this evening. It's a great privilege and a pleasure to be here. I too extend my thanks to CCX and League of Women Voters for hosting this evening. It's very important that we educate voters prior to going to vote this fall. My name is Perry Newis. I live in Plymouth. My wife, Jean, and I, we just celebrated our 38th wedding anniversary this past week. We have 4 growing children. We have 8 beautiful grandchildren. They're kind of scattered around the world because I'm a retired military officer, 24 years combined U.S. Army and U.S. Air Force. And we moved around the world, and we lived in several parts of the United States, and they don't feel that Minnesota is their home, but it is our home. I grew up in Little Falls, Minnesota. That's my hometown. Oldest of 9 children. Went off to do a military career, and was first an Army enlisted soldier for 3 years. Came back to Minnesota, completed a degree at St. Cloud State University in business management. And went back into the military in the Air Force in 1985, became a second lieutenant, and retired 20 years later as a lieutenant colonel in late 2004. I'm a career public affairs officer and have extensive experience working with businesses. I came back to a family business in 2004, and I was the administrator and co-owner of Newest Home Care, where we took care of disabled veterans and people with chemical dependency and the homeless. And I worked on a daily basis with people in my hometown. And in 2010, after Congressman Chip Kravac was elected, I joined his staff and provided constituent services throughout northern Minnesota as I managed his Brainerd office. So I'm looking forward to the issues and the discussion this evening. I think we're having a very vibrant discussion. We have a lot of issues to discuss, and I'm looking forward to the questions. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here this evening.
Thank you. And now Patty A. Combe, candidate for House District 44B.
Thank you. I am Representative Patty Acom, and I'm running for re-election to represent House District 44B. I also want to thank the League of Women Voters for this opportunity tonight. You know, we are in unusual times, and so opportunities like this to engage with voters is a really important part of being a candidate and an elected official. And so I think we've all spent a lot of time on Zoom over the last many months, but this is an incredibly great asset to help us with outreach. And so I thank you for the opportunity. I have lived in this district most of my life. I was born and raised here and came back when my husband and our kids were starting school. So I am married. I have a husband and 2 grown children who are both in college. And so an empty nest is what's going on at our house, which is kind of unusual. I graduated from the University of Minnesota with a degree in natural resource management. So environmental issues are certainly important to me. In my time back here in the district, before being elected to the Minnesota House, I served our community on the Minnetonka City Council for a number of years, and prior to that was on the Minnetonka Park Board. Community service has always been a value of mine, and I see this opportunity as a state representative as an extension of that. Let's see, the issues that are really important to me are issues that are important to the people in our district, and that really revolves around affordable and quality healthcare for everybody, good quality public schools. My kids both went through the public schools, as did I, and it's a resource that is incredibly important and everybody deserves. And then, of course, the environment. And so those are the issues important to me, and I've had many great conversations with people in our community who share those values. So I look forward to the questions tonight and to being able to go into some issues further.
Thank you. And now Gary Porter, candidate for House District 44B. Gary, you need to unmute yourself, please. Sorry.
There. I also would like to thank the League of Women Voters for putting on this forum. It's very important that we get the issues out and people know exactly where their candidates stand so that they can make an intelligent vote. I was a former state representative in North Dakota for 2 terms. I served on the Education Committee and the House Government Committee. Education has always been a major issue for me. I was a leader in the legislature in North Dakota to provide for more funding for our education. And as I look across the state of Minnesota today, I think that issue is as important as ever. One of the problems in Minnesota is that the legislature over the last few decades has failed to provide for an adequate and quality education for all students of Minnesota. And we see that from the standpoint that the poorer districts right now are getting much greater funding than the wealthier districts, but the results are not there. And in the wealthier districts, they're running 15 to 25% higher and or better educated coming out of those districts, which indicates to me that the money we're spending is not being spent wisely and that we need to get in and find out how we can get the poorer districts equal with the wealthier districts in this state. I think another area that is important in terms of the issues that we're facing today, and that's dealing with discrimination and racial equality. And that all ties into all the issues that I'm concerned about. We look at police reform. It's important that we reform the police, but it's also important that we do it so that all neighborhoods are safe and secure. And going back to education, unless we have a strong education system, we're not going to eliminate racial discrimination. So these are the kind of issues that I want to discuss tonight, along with fiscal responsibility.
Thank you. And now we will start the questions, and you will be answering in a rotating order, and you will have 1 minute for each question. And the first question will be answered first by Gary Porter, and then second by Patty Acom. And that question is, communities around the state are counting on funding for critical projects currently proposed in the bonding bill that didn't pass in the last legislative session. Please discuss the impact of future delay. What will you do to work toward passage of important infrastructure projects? And again, it'll first be Gary Porter.
Well, I think the bonding bill is a necessity, although in light of what's going on right now with COVID-19 and what it's doing to the economy of Minnesota, I think we also have to take that into consideration as well. But I do think that it was totally a travesty that the legislature was not able to come to a compromise conclusion and pass the bonding bill, because these are items that are needed across the various communities of Minnesota. And if I'm a part of the legislature, I'm going to put politics aside and sit down and work with both sides to make sure that we get a bonding bill that meets the needs of Minnesota.
Thank you. And now Patty Acom.
Thank you. This is just a really important question, and it's a really important topic right now, more than ever, given all that we're dealing with in regards to the pandemic and the impact on our state financially. The bonding bill is a jobs bill. It's an investment bill in our communities. And there were investments that were intended to be made in our district in Plymouth. And so they were authored by Representative Clevorn, and a really important part of an expansion of the Plymouth Community Center. And so it's not only impacting our community, but it's impacting all across the state. There were jobs, or excuse me, projects around housing, around water infrastructure that communities cannot afford otherwise. So the fact that this didn't pass and that the House Republicans held it up is truly unfortunate. And so we will continue to fight hard to get it passed as soon as we're back in session.
Thank you. And now to answer the question, Cheney Clevorn.
Thank you. I agree with Representative Acom. This is just such a critical issue for our community and for our state. In the spirit of compromise, the House DFL, working with the Minnesota Senate Republicans, agreed to combine the tax bill that they wanted and the bonding bill that the House Democrats wanted. It absolutely falls on the House GOP for the failure of this bill. We have members of the House GOP who actually really want these projects, and they have been working with us to try to figure out a way to allow them a face-saving way to get these important pieces done, including pieces of water sanitation systems in our greater Minnesota cities and places that are dumping raw sewage into the Mississippi. But as Representative Acom said, there are 3 really important pieces of legislation that I authored in that bill, and I will do everything I can to work with my colleagues, Republican and Democrat, to get this bill across the line. Thank you.
Thank you. And Perry Newis, please.
Yes, I think there's 2 reasons why there's opposition to the bonding bill. First of all, the governor put a $2.6 billion price tag on it, which was far above what Republicans were willing to go. And I also believe that the Republicans in the House are not happy with the governor and his exercise of his peacetime emergency powers, and are using it as leverage to rein that in. And so the cost factor, and also how the governor has been conducting himself since the pandemic was declared in March, I think are 2 reasons. I think that's all can be overcome. Clearly, there are a lot of projects in that bonding bill that are great from throughout the state. It was already pointed out a couple of them. A bonding bill will be happening or will be approved in the next biennium, but I think those are the issues that where it stands right now and what the holdup is.
Thank you. And now I will read the second question. How do you plan to address Minnesota's budget shortfall? Please discuss specific solutions. And this time we will be starting with Perry Newis, followed by Cheney Clevorn.
Oh, certainly. And that is the big issue, isn't it? I think the projected deficit is going to be at least $6 billion, maybe up to $7 billion, if not even more than that. And I view the problem as from the revenue side. The fact that so many businesses were forced to be closed, the revenue stream to the state was essentially shut down. And I believe that was mismanaged 1 month into the pandemic, but we might get into that when we start talking about the response to COVID. Where do we respond? Well, when you look at the budget, and nearly half of it, 48%, is education. Everything's going to be on the table. There's no way to get around it. I am going to protect taxpayers as much as I possibly can. I know that's the approach that the DFL and Democrats in the legislature want to take, is to start with taxes. And I'm opposed to that. I think we need to look at the budget and from a standpoint of where we can cut in the government and existing programs versus raising taxes on the taxpayers. So that would be my approach going into this, firmly committed to making sure that we protect our taxpayers going forward.
Thank you. And Cheney Clevorn, followed by Gary Porter.
Thank you for the question. The budget shortfall is going to be difficult. As I said earlier, there will be challenging decisions that need to be made. When we look at our budget there, it's actually a 3-legged stool. There is the revenue that we bring in taxes. There is the spending that we do within the budget for the biennium. And there are also tax expenditures, discounts and credits that have been given during times when we were flush. As the state representative for Plymouth, I am willing to look at every tool necessary to figure out the way to manage this deficit. Actually, the deficit right now is projected at $3.7 billion over the biennium, which is about $2 billion per year. That's only a tenth of the budget that we spend every year. Therefore, it's important to step back, use our tools, be rational, but systemic disinvestment in our state and in our families and in our schools is something that we have seen as a dramatic failure. Look at your crumbling infrastructures, look at your underfunded schools. Thank you.
Thank you. And Gary Porter, please. And unmute again.
Okay, sorry about that. I think as we look at the budget, and I've been involved in sessions when we weren't flush with cash and we couldn't raise taxes because the voters of North Dakota wouldn't allow it. So we had to go through each budget for every department and start to take a look and see where the fat was to get rid of it. You know, anybody who has been in business knows that when times are tough and you can't raise prices, the only thing you can do is to make yourself more efficient. And that sometimes means having to lay off people, which is not a fun job. Means having to take a look and figure out where you can cut expenses. And I think that's what the legislature is going to have to do in order to bring this problem under control. Raising taxes is not the answer. All that raising taxes is going to do is shrink already weak economy, and the money is not going to show up in the end, and we're still going to have the deficit to deal with.
Thank you. And Patty Aiken, please.
Thanks. You know, it's interesting. The start of 2020, we started out the legislative session with a surplus, and we were looking at ways for one-time spending to use that surplus money. And here we are, you know, not that 10 months later, and we are projecting a deficit for the next biennium. And so we definitely are going to be dealing with some challenging times. And I think that is right away in 2021, it will be important that we pass that bonding bill to invest in our communities for the job creation that it will make. So I think that's a huge start. I think we also are going to have tough decisions to make, but I tell you what, as I'm making those decisions, I want people to know I am going to make sure that we are not making the most vulnerable among us pay the most for how we balance this budget. And thank goodness in Minnesota, we do have to balance our budget. We can't carry a deficit forward. And so we will have to balance that budget, and it'll be challenging.
Thank you. And now we will move on to question 3. The Police Accountability and Reform Act that was passed earlier this year received bipartisan support. What, if any, next steps would you prioritize? And for question 3, the first person will be Patty Aiken, followed by Gary Porter.
Well, I think that this is a really important subject. And I think this year, more than ever, the equity issue has come to play in Minnesota and all across the country. And so I think that I'm proud of the bipartisan bill that we passed in the Minnesota House and the Senate and the governor signed into law, looking at police reform and accountability. And it's a step in the right direction, and it's not all done. It won't be one and done. And so there will be further things that need to happen. I think some of those off the top of my head would be around gun violence prevention. In order to keep our communities safe, we need to ensure that we have universal background checks, red flag laws when we have a person every day in Minnesota taking their life by gun. It's time that we're able to help take guns away from people who are in a threat of harming themselves or others. And so I think there are a whole lot of things that we can look at, and I look forward to that opportunity next session.
Thank you. And Gary Porter, to be followed by Perry Newis.
Well, I think first of all, what the legislature did thus far is the first step towards bringing about good police reform. When we see what's going on in the Minneapolis City Council, I think a lot of that is nonsense. To defund the police, whether you're re-imaging it or totally defunding it, is not the way to do it. We have to make sure that our community is safe and secure all across Minnesota. You know, I find it's interesting that there was a poll taken by the Minneapolis Tribune, And the people who supported the police the most was the Black community. Over 50% wanted to make sure that we had a strong police department. So I think it indicates that if we're going to have a safe and secure communities across the state, that we need to make sure that we have a strong police department. We need to make sure that we've got funds to provide for the best police officers that we can. We need to make sure that the training is the best that we can provide, so that we don't have the situation like happened with the George Floyd situation.
Thank you. Perry Newis.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think we need to start with this from the standpoint, first of all, of recognizing that the cops are the good guys, and realize that this notion of defunding them, and I know they're trying to back off of that, saying, well, we really didn't mean defund, we mean reimagine, and they come up with some other terms, but then you go back to them and they go, oh, no, we mean defund. So I do think we have to recognize that most police officers, the vast majority, are terrific, hardworking. They're doing dangerous work. We need to appreciate that. And they themselves realize that they don't want bad apples among them. It reflects on all of them. And it's been just devastating what's happened, not just here. It started in Minneapolis, and look how it's spread across the country. So, critical issue. I know it's being addressed. I know here in Plymouth, they're doing an outstanding job of recognizing it. Tough issue going forward, but I start from the standpoint that we need to support the police. I'm there for them. I'll work with them to make sure that whatever reforms that they feel are necessary. First of all, I don't think it's a systemic problem. It's isolated, and we need to recognize it as that.
Thank you. And Cheney Clevorn.
Thank you. This is a very important topic for the day. One, I want to say, just to make sure all Plymouth voters know, that police are funded by city councils. That is not a job of the state legislature. And also that the police reform bill that was brought before us for a vote this year has been 2 years in the making, with multiple stakeholders, both within law enforcement and within the community. I just want to put those facts out on the table. To answer the question, what more can we do at the legislature? We can alleviate the chronic stress that our officers are under. In working with Police Chief Goldstein, one of the things I have heard him say numerous times is healthy officers make for healthy communities. And it is that training that is mentioned earlier, and the gun violence prevention issues. Officers are always under chronic stress, but we also have to give our cities the opportunity to remove officers with poor performance, and also to know an officer's background before the decision to hire is made. And I think those are two really important pieces that I've discussed with the police chief that we can bring forward in the next legislature. Thank you.
Thank you. And now question 4. What is your energy policy? What place do renewable energy sources have in Minnesota? And for this question, we will start with Cheney Clevorn, followed by Perry Newis.
Thank you very much for that question. Patty Acom and I work very closely together on the Climate Action Group, and renewables, solar, wind are very, very important, and to make sure that we have those opportunities. In the legislature this year, I worked on the Forever Green initiative, which also was about cover crops and using cover crops to develop new biofuels, which are better for our environment and help also with keeping our soil healthy and our water and streams healthy. That's something that I'm interested in seeing where that's going to go. And also to working to make sure with Wright County, Hennepin Power, I've discussed many times the need for more clean electric vehicles, and they want to see more of that in our communities, and also with the state, making sure that our buildings are most energy efficient. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Perry Newis, followed by Gary Porter.
Well, thank you very much for the question. I think we're kidding ourselves if we think we're going to do away with fossil fuels. Certainly energy, solar, wind, that can all contribute. But I think we just need to look at what's going on in California right now. Brownouts, they don't have the power that is needing. They're doing rotating blackouts in California. And here in Minnesota, do we really want to rely on solar panels covered in a foot of snow and things of that nature? I think it can contribute and help. alleviate some of the energy needs, but to think that we're going to move away from fossil fuels like natural gas, and that's not going to happen. And we're a long way away from getting electric cars that go beyond a couple hundred miles before they have to recharge. Americans just aren't going to be ready to support that. If they were, they'd already be doing it, but they're not. And that's just the fact. So we're talking decades away from the technology to really take advantage of some of the sources that are out there. 30, 40 years from now, maybe solar and wind will be more of an answer than they are today.
Thank you. And Gary Porter.
This obviously is one of the major issues of the day when we're looking at climate control. I think that what as Perry mentioned, I think to say that we're going to get rid of fossil fuels overnight is pie in the sky. The one thing we have to do is that in working towards renewable energy, we've got to make sure that we have a good transition so that the people who work in the fossil fuel industries have jobs to go to and good paying jobs, not moving from a good paying job into some kind of a service job, which is more of an entry level type job. I think we also have to take a look at providing the research that's necessary, going into maybe a kind of a Manhattan type program that developed the atomic bomb, so that we can speed along the needs for developing renewable energies. But at the pace we're going right now, that simply is not going to happen.
Thank you. Patty Aiken.
Well, this is a question I am passionate about. Our climate is changing, and we see it changing in my lifetime. I have seen our climate change just living here in Minnesota. One of the fellow candidates brought up we should be watching California. Well, we're watching California burn as a result of climate change. And we're watching the impacts of the hurricanes on the Gulf of Mexico that are happening more frequently. Our weather is changing, and it's a direct result of fossil fuel burning. And so we are seeing the impacts. We're seeing the market change on its own. Coal, which we were all dependent upon, is going away on its own because of the costs. And the cost to develop new energy forms, the cheapest form right now is wind. So you talk about jobs, the fastest growing job sector in Minnesota is in the renewable energy sector. Nobody's talking about transitioning overnight, but we can't ignore the science.
Thank you. And now we are on question 5. The economic impact of COVID-19 is likely to have a greater impact on housing instability and homelessness, especially as the weather turns colder. What can the legislature do to address these issues? And first we will have Patty Aiken, followed by Gary Porter.
The issue of housing is so important. And, you know, without a roof over our head, how can we be expected to succeed in life and to be able to thrive? And so while on the Minnetonka City Council, I fought hard for including affordable housing units in our new buildings within our city as new projects were coming about. I think we can look at one of the measures that is a part of the proposed bonding bill is around housing, and $100 million to put toward housing. And what I will say about housing is it's great to provide affordable rental units, but the way we gain wealth in the United States is through home ownership. And so we need to be working harder to develop programs to get those that are disadvantaged into home ownership opportunities. And so I think there are some great programs that I will work harder to push forward. And as I said before, the bonding bill it's another way to use the bonding bill that would be incredibly helpful on this issue.
Thank you. Gary Porter.
I lost the picture altogether. Anyway, this is an issue I've seen developing over the years and wondering how people were going to be able to keep up with it. When I originally started looking for a house, $100,000 house was a mansion, 6,000 square feet. And it was today, $100,000 house is probably a 1,500 to 1,000 to 2,000 if you're lucky. I think this is an issue whose time has come. For young families starting out, it's very difficult for them to be able to buy a house when you're looking at the average price at $250,000, and you're not getting much for $250,000 today. I think in terms of trying to provide housing for low income, it's a difficult issue. And maybe one of the ways to do it is providing tax incentives for developers to develop housing for the lower income, and the same thing for apartments.
Thank you. Now I'll ask Cheney Clevorn, please.
Thank you. I'm not exactly sure when this report came out, but there was a report that stated just in the last 2 years that in no county in Minnesota can a family afford to rent an apartment on a minimum wage job. So housing affordability is a major problem all across our state, not just in the metro region. And COVID has laid bare really serious problems. Families that are working to barely get by are not able to save for periods of time for hardship. And with this, we have now seen the ripple effect also with our landlords. So one of the things that we need to do is work in passing that bonding bill so people can have good jobs and it'll jumpstart our economy, have the bonding to build more affordable housing all across our state, but also to working for some protections, both for our landlords, our renters, and our homeowners to figure out how we help them recover from this COVID crisis. They can't be mired with debt forever and ever based on this COVID crisis, and we'll have to come together as community to figure that out.
Thank you. And Perry Newis, please.
Well, I believe the situation wouldn't be nearly as dire if our economy hadn't been forced closed by the governor. I think that the governor's decision to force the closure of businesses throughout the state and force 600,000 Minnesotans onto unemployment has had a major impact on people's ability to afford their rents and pay their bills. I do think, and maybe we're going to talk about COVID's response here, but I'm just going to start by saying that I agreed with the governor initially. Yeah, we needed to take some very strong steps. The numbers he was talking about were scary. We needed to do what we did. But then when 3-4 weeks into it, and we realized the data wasn't supporting what he was projecting, which was 50,000 deaths or something dire like that, the data wasn't there. And instead of reopening the economy, getting businesses back open and getting people back to their jobs, he stood by those decisions, and he's been very reluctant to let people go back to work. And so I think the problem wouldn't be nearly as dire if he had loosened it up a bit, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about that, more about that in a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you. And now question 6. What actions, if any, should the legislature take to address concerns about racial justice and equity? And we will be starting here with Perry Newis, followed by Cheney Clevorn.
Well, thank you for the question. And first of all, I want to start by saying the United States is not a racist country. Minnesota is not a racist state. Plymouth is not a racist city. And I think that there's what I see happening on our streets across the country is just been devastating. I really can't believe it. Now, I know there's isolated issues, but I don't think it's a systemic problem. We've come a long way in this country in addressing those issues, and I don't think enough credit is being given to that. So when I hear that our schools are going to focus on equity issues and social engineering type issues, I kind of go, we're getting diverted away from the primary mission of what our schools should be doing. And I think that we have a group of activists that are keeping the issue in the forefront, and that we have other major issues that need to be dealt with at the moment.
Thank you. And Cheney Clevorn.
I'm going to ask you if you would please repeat the question.
Certainly. What actions, if any, should the legislature take to address concerns about racial justice and equity?
Thank you for repeating the question. Wow, that's a lot. So to these questions, I would like to say Minnesota has historically had issues with opportunities in housing, employment, healthcare, and education for communities of color and Indigenous. That's a fact. Um, we need to, at the legislature, whenever we look at any legislation, say, what does this legislation do to the least among us? The idea is to do no harm and to support every person in our state. Equity is about making sure that people have what they need before people who have everything they need get a little bit more. That's what equity means. So I would say the legislature should look at every piece of legislation through the lens of equity to make sure that our poor, our downtrodden, all across the state, no matter your color, no matter your heritage, your culture, everybody needs to be lifted up in this state. Thank you.
Thank you. Patty Acom.
Thank you. You know, this whole topic has been, I've thought so much about it this year. It's been such an important one. And I will say, in agreeing with Representative Clevorn on so many of the things that she talked about, I think the data shows that there are disparities between whites and communities of color in healthcare outcomes, education, employment, impacts of climate change, incarceration. There is, it would be hard to find topics where there aren't issues. And so we need to absolutely look at everything through that lens of equity and racial equality. We have spent so many years trying to fight the education gap and gotten nowhere. And so we need to be working harder with communities of color to determine the ways we can go forward. And so including people of color in the decision making is going to be a huge step forward.
Thank you. And Gary Porter.
This is an issue that has always been one that I have fought for over the years. And I will say that I think today that when we take a look at how do we solve this problem, the problem is solved twofold. Number one, we need police reform so that all communities in this state feel safe and secure. All neighborhoods in this state are safe and secure. That's one way we're going to bring about equality. But more importantly, we have to close the education gap that's there today. We can't have the poorer school districts not getting the education that they should in comparison to the wealthier school districts. This has got to stop. We need to make sure that every child is getting a quality education in the state of Minnesota. The only way that we're going to throw the shackles of inequality off is making sure that everybody has a good education so that they're able to take advantage of the American dream.
Thank you. And question 7. Minnesota recently passed the Alex Smith Insulin Affordability Act. Do you support additional legislative action to further address the affordability of prescriptions and critical healthcare supplies? If yes, what ideas do you have for next steps? And the first person here will be Gary Porter, followed by Patty Acom.
I keep hitting the wrong button and losing the picture. This is an issue that's very critical. And one of the things that I can't quite understand on some of the medications that I take, I'm facing the same issues of rising costs, is that we've always been told that the cost of medication is because of the cost of the research. And once the cost of the research is paid for, the medication, the price of the medication should go down. My thinking is we need to ask the pharmaceutical industry, how come, for example, insulin, the cost of it continues to skyrocket? And surely for all the years that we've had insulin, it's definitely the research has been paid for. I know in my case for medications for asthma, that's continually going up and going up. That also has been paid for. And I think these are the things that the legislature needs to look into and put pressure on the pharmaceutical industry to justify why they're charging the prices that they are charging.
Thank you. And Patty Acom, followed by Perry Newis.
I think this is an issue that is incredibly important to so many people in our district. I think that for insulin dependent diabetics to be having to spend $300 a week to get insulin that they need in order to live, as was pointed out just a moment ago, for a medication that was developed a long time ago and is sold in other countries around the world for much less. And so I think the pharmaceutical companies are taking advantage because they can. And so there's a bill that we passed last year called the Drug Price Transparency Act, with really the intent of taking the curtain away so that we can see what the economics of it are. And I think it's infuriating when a doctor wants to prescribe a medication and the drug companies and the insurance companies say they have to try something else and fail at that first in order to get the medication that the doctor initially wanted to prescribe. So there's a lot of changes that need to happen.
Thank you. Perry Newis, please.
Yeah, and sadly, I had a brother. He passed away a number of years ago in a drowning accident, but he was a diabetic and he had a type 1 diabetes. And when I see that it's price gouging, that's what's going on. And there's not a good explanation. I would agree with what's already been said as far as pressuring pharmaceuticals companies here to explain why the prices are so high here in the United States versus what they're selling these very same formulas and drugs for, even in Canada and other parts of the world. It clearly comes down to money because they apparently think they can charge that. And we have to look at that, how we can rein that in, because that is out of control. There's absolutely no question about it. And we're talking about major dollars. And I think it comes down to that. That's pharmaceuticals realize that, and Gary, as Gary pointed out, that research and development money was recouped very rapidly, and that it became just profit centers for the pharmaceuticals. So that is an ongoing issue, and it's something that clearly needs to be addressed, and we need more transparency in that entire issue.
Thank you. And Cheney Clevorn.
Thank you. I'm not going to repeat many of the good things that my colleague, Representative Acom, talked about, but we also do have to realize that the pharmaceutical industry is in business to make money. That's capitalism, and capitalism is never intended for everyone to get what they need. It's about reaping the largest profits they can for their shareholders. So it is a problem that we need to face and address. And we also need to be looking at how we allow commerce in our state. Are we going to allow in our state complete vertical integration from insurance to pharmacies to provider within our state? What does that look like? What does a good, healthy prescription drug program look like in our state? Our small pharmacies are being run out of business, and we need to work with them and help them have protections. But also too, I just think we have to think about, could we negotiate prices? Can our large companies and our insurers negotiate prices and do buying in bulk and try to get those economies of scale and efficiencies there?
Thank you. And now this will be the final question before your closing statements. Is there an issue that wasn't discussed in this forum that you would like to address? And we will start with Cheney Clevorn.
Well, I think that just goes to what does it take to be a good legislator? And That question wasn't asked. What are our skills? And as a professional mediator and as a businesswoman, I would say it's really important that we are able to step back from our own personal positions and look at the bigger picture, that 30,000 foot view, and see what is it that our community needs and how do we build the relationships that we need to have the collaboration that we need to drive the results that we need for our community. We have to listen, collaborate, and lead. And with that, it means making sure that you develop the relationships with each other at the Capitol. Right now, the Democrats are in control of the House. Next time, it may be the Republicans who are in control. But we have to build the relationships so that we can get the work done. That's what I bring to the Capitol, and that's what I'd like to do for our community. Thank you.
Thank you. And Perry Newis, followed by Gary Porter.
Well, one of the things that I thought we would discuss more was the response to the COVID-19 pandemic and how the state has responded to it. I'm going to say Governor Walz has responded to it because the legislature has been out of the picture on this. And that bothers me greatly. It's one of the reasons I got into this race. As I said earlier, I absolutely agreed with the governor when he started projecting what we were faced with. Absolutely, we needed to take some stringent, strong steps, shut down the economy. I agreed with that. Close the business, but where the problem came in is when the numbers just weren't there. And instead of backing off, he came up with this idea of dials and that we can slowly recover. Well, here we are 6.5 months later, and we still are, he hasn't fiddled with the dials since June, and now we're facing mask mandates. And I just think that whole issue, I wish he was on the ballot in November so he could get some direct feedback from the voters. Unfortunately, he's not, and we're going to have to, the legislature, the House of Representatives run by the DFL, has not reined him in. And I think that's been a big issue that I wish we had discussed a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you. And Gary Porter.
Well, I think we've discussed the issue that is closest to my heart, and that is when we talk about racial discrimination and how do we solve it. I discussed that a little bit earlier, but I think education is probably one of the prime issues that Minnesota has to face. And the legislature, whether it's been in Republican hands or in DFL hands, has totally failed our educational system. We shouldn't have poorer districts putting out students that can't read, can't do math. We shouldn't have poorer districts that don't have kids that go to college and learn how to better themselves. It's time the legislature sit down and get to the root of the problem. We can pour tons of money into our educational system, but what good is it going to do if we keep getting the same results that we've got now? And so I think the time has come that the governor and the legislature needs to go to work, set up a task force with parents, teachers, administrators, business people, school board members, and find a way to make our schools so that they're providing a quality education for all the students across the state of Minnesota.
Thank you. And now we will have a chance to hear your 2-minute closing statements.
You missed
me.
Oh,
I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
That's quite all right, no problem. I think one of the topics that I'm a little bit surprised we didn't talk about is higher education in Minnesota. We find that so many of our young people today, when they're graduating from college, they are just burdened with huge debt. And so the cost of college is out of control for so many and out of reach for so many. And so I look at the, coming from my municipal roots, I look at the perspective of the impact that that's going to have on our communities. If these young people are so burdened with debt, they're not going to be able to afford to buy homes and move to our communities to be able to continue to support our schools. And so I think the domino effect of really the impact of the cost of higher education is an important issue that we need to be looking at. And it can be, from ways of expanding post-secondary education opportunities within high school and advanced placement, other creative ways to get the cost of higher education more affordable for all of our young people.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Now we will have the opportunity to hear your 2-minute closing statement. And I will first call on Gary Porter, followed by Patty Acom.
Again, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for providing us with this forum tonight to express our opinions on the issues that are important to all of us in Minnesota. I think as we go forward, there are a lot of things that the next legislature needs to look into. With COVID-19, it's created an economy that is shrinking. It's created an economy that we're all having a tough time dealing with. So as a result, I think the legislature has to address the issues of housing as we discussed today. I think we have to further address the issue of police reform so that we continue so that we are able to create a police force which is going to be strong, a police force which is going to be able to provide safety and security for all neighborhoods across the state of Minnesota. I think when we look at education, another issue we discussed tonight, again, the legislature needs to really tear into that situation to continue to come back and say, I raised the budget for education, and the results come out exactly the same, is just bang your head against the wall until your head doesn't hurt anymore. And we can't continue doing that anymore in Minnesota if we're going to have an educational system that's going to provide every student with a chance at the American dream. In terms of getting our fiscal house in order, I think that the legislature needs to take on the responsibility of making the tough decisions as to where we're going to be able to make cuts, making sure that we don't cut muscle, but that we're cutting fat along the way. Taxes are not going to be the answer in an economy like this, because all it's going to do is shrink our economy further, and the results are going to be that the revenue is not going to show up. And we're going to have a special session to go through and make sure that we make the cuts the next time around. And finally, I think in terms of the bonding bill, which is also a jobs bill, that it's important that the legislature sit down, make the compromises that are necessary, and get it passed to help the working people of Minnesota.
Thank you. Patty Acom.
Well, thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum tonight, and for all of my fellow candidates for participating. I do think this is an incredibly important resource for us this year, and so I thank you for providing the opportunity. I will say it has truly been my honor to represent District 44B at the Minnesota Legislature. Being a member of the Minnesota House has been quite an educational opportunity. I have learned a ton and feel like I've made a really good impact for our district. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be able to do that. I want to make sure that everybody is aware that early voting has started already, and there are several ways to be able to vote. You can vote, request absentee ballots, you can vote early in person at city halls, and you can vote in your polls on election day. And so there's choices that will be there for everybody and their needs. This has been a really hard year, and it's not over yet. And so we still have some hard times coming ahead of us. And I certainly think that if we work together, we're going to be able to get through it together. And so I ask for your vote. I ask for your support. You can find more information about my campaign at my website, pattyacom.com. And if there are questions that you had that didn't get asked tonight, please reach out to me. I'm more than happy to have a phone call or Zoom and talk with you about the issues that are important to you. So I look forward to the opportunity to gather in person with people once again very soon. And as I said, thank you so much for the opportunity tonight.
Thank you. And Perry Newis, please.
Yes, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters this evening for hosting this forum. It's been fantastic. I want to thank my fellow candidates for putting yourselves out there. It's a very difficult thing to do. A lot of people don't appreciate what goes into running for public office. They really, in a lot of cases, don't have any clue how much goes into it. But I want to thank you all for running. And I feel I bring a real broad range of experience to represent the people of Plymouth. Plymouth is a fantastic community. It's a well-run city. Schools are great. Our quality of life here in Plymouth is just outstanding. It's one of the reasons that my wife and I chose to live here, and I want to keep it that way. And I'm going to work very hard to make sure that that happens. The reasons I got into this race primarily was to restore our economy. I've stressed it a few times tonight, just absolutely my heart breaks for the businesses that have been, the small businesses that have been affected. I thought the decisions that were made early on were discriminatory. And the fact that the big stores were allowed to remain open and now they're reporting record profits. And I go, well, that's at the expense of whom? And it was a lot of the small business owners. And I think that they've been devastated by what's happened. And also to all the unemployed, their workers. It's just been heartbreaking to see what's occurred this year. So I think, and I agree with Patty, we need to put an asterisk by 2020. I think historians are going to look at this many years down the road and they go, what was that all about? Because it's been a very difficult year for many, many Minnesotans. So I bring a broad range of experience as a healthcare administrator up in Little Falls, and my military experience. I was the director of public affairs for the Air Force Academy. I worked for a congressman. I did constituent services for him. And I worked with city councils and school boards throughout northern Minnesota, county commissioners. I worked all kinds of issues regarding the environment and trails. And so I look forward to representing the people in the legislature. And I feel I'll do an outstanding job representing Plymouth in the Minnesota legislature. And again, thank you so much for hosting this forum.
Thank you, Cheney Clevorn.
Thank you. And like my fellow colleagues here on the platform tonight, I'll say thank you one more time to the League of Women Voters in Plymouth and Wayzata and the city of Plymouth, but also to those of you who are at home watching this. It takes all of us to be engaged in the messy process of democracy, and your engagement and your vote matter, your voice matters, and I'm asking you to exercise that vote. We've touched on many important topics this evening facing our families, our state, and our community. But it's our conversations that drive my work at the Capitol. My priorities for work are your priorities, your family, our schools, our city, and our businesses. At the end of the day, regardless of politics, skin color, or cultural heritage, we, you and I, want the same things. We want a good job that allows us to pay our bills, a safe home to live and raise our families. We want high quality education for our children. As Patty said, that doesn't burden us with outstanding college debt. We want affordable and accessible health care. And at the end of the day, we also need a safe community, a respectful community, and to be able to retire with $1 in our pocket and have savings to enjoy our twilight years. I'm often asked how we get past the ugliness of today's politics. And it's the choices that we make, not just the choices for politicians, but also the choices each of us makes. Before we tweet, text, write, ask yourself, is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? We have to fix this divide together. Please, I'm asking you to commit to do your part. As always, I'm committed to positive language, cooperation, and continue to build trusting relationships. That's the key to our future. My name is Cheney Clevorn. It's been an honor to serve as your state representative these past 2 years. I'm asking for your vote for re-election on November 3rd. Thank you.
Thank you. This concludes the House District 44A, House District 44B candidate forum. Thank you to the candidates, the League of Women Voters volunteers, and those viewing this event on cable and video for your participation in this forum. Thank you to the City of Plymouth for supporting this event and to CCX Media for recording tonight's forum. On-demand viewing can be accessed at ccxmedia.org, as well as on the League of Women Voters, Wayzata Plymouth, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and on our website at www.lwvwpa.org. Please remember to vote in the November 3rd general election by absentee ballot or in person. Your vote is your voice. The League of Women Voters welcomes new members, both women and men. And again, you can find information at LWVWPA.org. Thank you and good night.